What if everything we thought we knew about Prince Harry's royal exit was a carefully constructed illusion? What if the story the world was told, the brave prince breaking free from a stifling institution, was only half the truth? Because according to those closest to the royal circle, it wasn't just a decision made in the heat of frustration or love. It was a plan, a secret, months-long operation that even blindsided his own brother, Prince William. It began quietly, almost too quietly. The world saw the polished smiles, the royal walkabouts, the speeches dripping with charm. But behind the palace gates, whispers grew louder. Staff noticed unusual meetings, calls from Hollywood numbers, notes that disappeared before they could be filed. There were glimmers of something brewing, something big, but no one dared speak it aloud. Not yet. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Then came the moment that would send shockwaves through the monarchy. William, the ever-loyal heir, stumbled upon what no one expected. Proof that his brother, the one he had defended countless times, had been plotting his exit from royal life for months, long before any official announcement. Imagine that realization. The man who shared his childhood, his grief, his mother's memory, quietly paving a path out of the royal world, behind his back. Can you picture that betrayal? The kind that doesn't just hurt. It rearranges everything you thought was true. William reportedly slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "He lied to us. This was never about freedom." That moment wasn't just anger. It was heartbreak disguised as fury. But let's rewind. Because to understand the depth of this discovery, we need to go back to the months leading up to what the media called Megxit. The signs were there. They always are, aren't they? When a storm brews, the first raindrops are easy to miss. It began with distance. Not just physical, but emotional. Harry started declining family events, citing exhaustion or privacy. He skipped dinners, left meetings early, became vague about his schedules. William noticed, of course, he always did. He'd always been the watchful one. But this time, the changes felt different. Less about rebellion, more about preparation. When Harry and Meghan launched their private Instagram account, many inside the palace brushed it off as modern branding. But those who watched closely saw something else: independence. A slow, deliberate uncoupling from the institution's communication machinery. And the irony? The royal press team, the same machine Harry would later accuse of betrayal, had actually been trying to help him manage the growing pressure. But by then, it was too late. The plan was already in motion. According to one palace insider, Meghan had begun taking private meetings in California months before the royal exit. Meetings that were described as personal development opportunities. But when details surfaced that these talks included media producers and branding consultants, eyebrows shot up in Buckingham Palace corridors. Still, no one thought it would go this far. Not until William, acting on a hunch, requested an update from one of the staffers overseeing the brothers' charitable projects. What he saw in those briefing notes reportedly left him cold. There were communications dated months earlier, long before Harry publicly claimed he'd only started thinking about leaving in late 2019. Drafts of proposals, early outlines of interviews, and discussions with media representatives. To William, it looked less like a personal crisis and more like a carefully timed campaign. It's the kind of discovery that doesn't just make you angry. It makes you question every memory, every shared moment. Did Harry ever mean it when he said they were in this together? Or was that just another line in a story already being rewritten behind the scenes? William, as insiders describe, paced the floors of Kensington Palace late into the night, torn between confrontation and disbelief. The man who had once said he would do anything to protect his brother now realized he didn't even know who that brother had become. And yet, through all the pain, there was one unshakable thought burning in William's mind. Why? Why didn't Harry tell him? Why hide it? Was it pride, fear, or had something, or someone, convinced him that secrecy was the only path forward? Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was an institutional threat. Every royal move, every media contract, every whisper could destabilize the very image the monarchy worked centuries to preserve. The palace, upon realizing the scope of what was happening, reportedly launched a quiet internal review. Not public, of course. Discretion is the royal code. But behind closed doors, aides scrambled to trace communication trails, tighten access, and monitor leaks. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry were already steps ahead, crafting a narrative that would capture public sympathy before the palace could even react. The royal communications team, bound by protocol, couldn't compete with the global reach of a well-timed interview or a Hollywood partnership. And William? He was left standing between two worlds, the institution that demanded silence and the brother who had chosen noise. There's something deeply ironic about that, isn't there? The future king, trained all his life to stay composed, watching the brother he once protected become a global brand by breaking every rule William was sworn to uphold. But even then, William didn't go public. He couldn't. Not yet. Because he wasn't ready for what would come next, the confrontation that would test his loyalty not just as a royal, but as a brother and a son. By this point, tension had reached a breaking point within palace walls. Staff walked on eggshells. Meetings were hushed. Every leaked headline felt like a direct strike. Insiders described William's demeanor shifting from frustration to disbelief, then to quiet resolve. One aide recalls seeing him staring out the window of his office for nearly an hour, watching the courtyard below. When asked if he was all right, he reportedly replied, "It's not the press I'm worried about anymore. It's the truth." That single sentence encapsulated the emotional core of this unfolding drama. The truth, elusive, twisted, and now weaponized. Because when family becomes the story, there are no winners, only fallout. And that's what makes this revelation so powerful. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about transformation. Harry, once the mischievous younger brother, had evolved into something the palace could no longer contain. And William, the dutiful heir, was forced to confront what that transformation meant for the monarchy and for his own future. Now imagine the meeting that followed. The phone calls, the tense silences, the tears that no one saw. Because for all the grandeur of the monarchy, at its core, it's still a family, a very broken one. Every royal rulebook crumbled in that moment. Every unwritten code of loyalty turned to dust. Because when William finally realized what Harry had done, that his brother's grand escape wasn't spontaneous at all, he understood something much darker, that the royal family's greatest threat wasn't the tabloids, or the press, or even public opinion. It was betrayal from within, and it wasn't over yet. Because the next time William and Harry met face to face, what unfolded would shatter every illusion of reconciliation the world had hoped for. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Before the explosion, before the confrontation that tore two brothers apart, there was calm. Or at least, the illusion of it. The world still believed in the fairy tale. The Fab Four, William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan, were the royal family's modern hope, the shining image of renewal after decades of scandal and sorrow. But like all illusions, it was destined to crack. And behind the palace gates, those cracks had already started to show. At first, they were small things. Subtle. Harry skipping a briefing. Meghan missing a charity lunch with an unexplained schedule conflict. Staffers whispering about tension between communications teams. To the public, it was just gossip. But to those inside the royal machine, it was a shift in the air, the kind of silence that happens before thunder. William, by nature and training, had always been the observer. He could sense changes in rhythm, the kind of emotional currents that others missed. And lately, Harry's rhythm was off. The jokes were forced, the smiles too polished. The brother who once mocked royal stuffiness now seemed rehearsed, guarded. Was it marriage? Was it media pressure? Or was it something far more deliberate? The palace had a saying, "Still waters run deep and dangerous." And Harry had gone very still. In public, they stood shoulder to shoulder. They smiled for cameras, clapped at events, spoke of unity. But behind the scenes, Harry was withdrawing, not just from his duties, but from his brother. He stopped sharing plans. He stopped checking in. He started saying things like, "We just need to do our own thing," or "We can't rely on the old ways anymore." William brushed it off at first. Brothers fight, don't they? Especially in royal life, where duty crushes spontaneity. He had seen Harry restless before. But this time, something was different. Because this time, Harry wasn't just frustrated. He was focused. One aide recalled how, during a joint royal engagement, Harry spent the entire car ride scrolling through his phone, texting someone urgently. When William asked what was going on, Harry replied flatly, just sorting out something personal. Then he turned away, shutting down the conversation completely. That may sound small, but in royal terms, it was seismic. Because in the monarchy, personal is never just personal. Every action, every call, every word has implications for the crown. And William, ever the heir, ever the protector, couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from him. The tensions simmered through the summer. William noticed Harry's growing distance from palace operations, his increasing reliance on outside advisors. He noticed how Meghan began to subtly challenge this system, questioning protocols, pushing for independent press access, even suggesting alternative media strategies. That wasn't just bold, it was dangerous. Because every royal story, every photo, every interview is controlled, approved, and perfectly calibrated. Deviating from that system wasn't rebellion, it was a declaration of independence. And yet, Harry seemed to love it. According to insiders, it was around this time that Meghan introduced Harry to a series of influential figures from her own world: Hollywood producers, branding experts, media strategists. Meetings that were presented as friendly advice, but in hindsight, felt like the blueprint for something far bigger. Still, William had no idea. Not yet. He continued fulfilling his royal duties, attending state events, preparing for his eventual role as king, while quietly worrying that his younger brother was spiraling into something he couldn't control. He confided in close aides that he was worried about Harry's direction, but was told to stay patient, to give it time. And then came the summer retreat to Balmoral. It was supposed to be a time of peace, long walks, quiet dinners, no press. But even there, the tension followed them. Harry and Meghan arrived late, stayed separate, and left early. When the Queen asked if everything was all right, Harry reportedly said, "Just tired." But William wasn't convinced. At one point, while out walking the grounds with his father, William voiced his concern. "Something's changed, Pa. He's not himself." Charles, perhaps weary from decades of royal rifts, reportedly sighed and said, "Then let him be. He'll come back around." But he didn't. After Balmoral, Harry's absences became impossible to ignore. He declined family Christmas planning sessions. He skipped over joint press briefings. He stopped attending internal charity meetings for the Royal Foundation. Even the staff who managed both brothers began to feel the divide. They described the atmosphere as tense, awkward, and on edge. Then came the first real warning sign. A staffer accidentally copied William's private secretary on an email chain discussing a media strategy proposal that included language about independent branding and personal autonomy. The phrase, independent branding, sent alarm bells ringing across Kensington Palace. William confronted one of his aides. "What's this about?" The aide hesitated before replying. "It's something the Sussex team's been drafting, sir, for their future work." Future work? The words hit him harder than expected. What kind of future work was being planned that didn't involve the family? That didn't include the crown? Still, William tried to give his brother the benefit of the doubt. He believed, deep down, that Harry would never betray him, that whatever this was, it would resolve quietly. But deep down, that belief was already cracking, because William had begun hearing things. Whispers, mentions of production companies, projects being pitched under pseudonyms, a charity initiative with suspiciously cinematic branding. He brushed most of it aside, until he received a call from a trusted friend in the media. Off the record, the friend said, "You might want to look into what your brother's doing in LA." That's when it hit him. The personal calls, the secret trips, the growing walls between them. This wasn't a drift, it was a detour. And Harry wasn't lost. He was driving. Still, William stayed quiet. He didn't want to believe it, not without proof. At least, not until proof found him. Weeks later, an aide brought him a folder of internal documents, nothing classified, but sensitive enough to require discretion. Among them were references to scheduling conflicts, early project proposals, and correspondence that clearly suggested Harry had been in talks with representatives months before his supposed moment of realization. One note stood out: draft concept for personal documentary, exploring themes of independence, authenticity, and truth. That one word, independence, froze him. For William, this wasn't just professional betrayal. It was personal devastation. All those late-night talks after Diana's death, all the promises they'd made to uphold her legacy together, What did it mean now? He sat there, staring at the document, and whispered. He knew. All this time, he knew. The next few days were chaos. William avoided direct contact with Harry, unsure how to confront him without detonating the entire family dynamic. But his silence didn't last long, because as the media began picking up on rumors of a royal transition, the palace's internal pressure cooker reached its limit. In one particularly tense meeting, a senior aide suggested issuing a joint statement from both brothers reaffirming their commitment to royal duties. William reportedly responded sharply, "Not until I know the truth." That truth, however, was darker than he could have imagined, because as he would soon discover, this wasn't just about an exit. It was about a plan, one that had been unfolding under his nose for months, perhaps longer. And when that realization finally came crashing down, the calm before the storm would end, and the real storm would begin. Because what William was about to uncover next would not only shake the palace walls, it would make him question everything he thought he knew about loyalty, freedom, and family. And that revelation would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started with a single email, a digital whisper that would shatter trust between two brothers who were once inseparable. A message so ordinary in appearance that, at first glance, it could have been about anything: a scheduling update, a project note, maybe even a follow-up from a charity contact. But it wasn't. It was the proof William never wanted to find. The email arrived one overcast afternoon, tucked inside a briefing packet sent to William's private office. It wasn't addressed to him directly. It was an attachment accidentally included in correspondence between staff who handled communications for both brothers. William wasn't even supposed to see it. Fate, or perhaps irony, made sure he did. When his assistant slid the folder across his desk, she looked uneasy. "Sir," she said softly, "this came through from the Joint Comms office. I think you'll want to read it." He scanned the subject line first. It read, "Follow-up, North American Partnership Strategy." His brows furrowed. Partnership strategy? What partnership? He clicked open the document, and that was when the air left the room. The message was from one of Harry's senior aides to a well-known PR consultancy based in Los Angeles. The content was unmistakable. Discussions about brand positioning, narrative control, and global media engagement for the Duke and Duchess as independent public figures. The date of the email? 6 months before Harry and Meghan had publicly announced they were stepping back from royal duties. 6 months. William's mind spun. He reread the lines over and over again, hoping, praying, that it was a misunderstanding. But there it was in plain text. References to documentary concepts, podcast frameworks, philanthropic, content strategy, and long-term U.S. media partnerships. Independent, global, branding. Each word cut deeper than the last. The blood drained from his face. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. He couldn't. But he had. According to one insider who later spoke to palace correspondents, William's reaction was volcanic. He slammed the folder shut and shouted, "He lied to us. This was never about freedom." Imagine the pain behind that sentence. This wasn't the voice of a prince. It was the voice of a brother, betrayed. And that betrayal didn't end with an email. Because the more William's team dug, the more they found. It was like following a trail of breadcrumbs, each one leading to a darker realization. There were meeting notes with producers, private calls logged with U.S. media reps, even preliminary outlines for Harry's future memoir, months before the first rumor ever surfaced. All those moments Harry had told the family, "We're still figuring things out." They weren't figuring anything out. They were executing a plan. And for William, that realization wasn't just painful. It was humiliating. He'd defended Harry endlessly. To his father, to aides, even to the Queen. He'd told everyone, he just needs time. He's hurting. But now it was clear, while William was shielding his brother, Harry had already been building an empire behind the scenes. One palace insider later confided, William felt foolish, like he'd been the last to know in his own house. But let's pause here, because this isn't just about a single lie. This was about timing. Because around this same period, Harry was giving interviews about wanting space and freedom, painting the royal system as suffocating. Meanwhile, in private, he was negotiating projects that relied on the fame that very system had given him. The contradiction was staggering. Was it hypocrisy? Or was it strategy? That's the question that kept William awake that night. He sat in his study long after midnight, staring at that printed email on his desk. The only light came from a single lamp beside a framed photograph. Him, Harry, and their mother, Diana, laughing together in the garden at Kensington Palace. Back then, there were no lies. No secrets. Just two boys who promised they'd always have each other's backs. And now, one of them was preparing to walk away, and cash in while doing it. William reportedly told one of his confidants, "He's not the man I thought he was. Or maybe he is, and I never really knew him at all." The next day, the situation escalated. Word spread quietly through the palace that William had seen something. Senior staff began holding discreet meetings, trying to assess the potential fallout. Because if the future king had lost trust in his brother, it wasn't just a family feud, it was an institutional crisis. In royal terms, fractured brotherhood means fractured public image. The entire modern monarchy had been built around the image of unity, the heirs working together, balancing tradition with modernity. If that image collapsed, so would the public's faith. But the damage was already done. William demanded answers. He requested a private briefing with Harry's senior aide, the same one who had written the email. When the aide arrived, pale and trembling, William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I want the truth," he said. "Every detail. Every plan. When did this start?" The aide hesitated, then muttered, "Sir, it's been in development for a while." "How long?" "Since the spring." William's jaw tightened. That was nearly a year before Harry's public statement about stepping back. He leaned forward. "Did he tell anyone?" "Did he tell me?" The aide said nothing. Silence can be deafening, and that silence said everything. Later, reports would claim that William walked out of that meeting shaking with rage. But the truth was far more complex. Yes, there was anger, but there was also grief. The kind of grief that comes when you realize the person you've spent your life protecting no longer trusts you. And yet, as furious as he was, William still hesitated to confront Harry directly. He needed to think. He needed proof beyond doubt before he risked detonating a family scandal. So he ordered a quiet internal review, discreet, limited to a handful of senior aides. No leaks, no paperwork, no trace. Their task: verify the extent of Harry's outside dealings. It didn't take long. They uncovered correspondences with U.S. legal representatives, early contacts with a major streaming platform, and draft proposals for a multi-year philanthropic content partnership. The coded language was clear. It was about deals, not duty. Even worse, several of these exchanges predated Harry and Meghan's public grievances with the media. In other words, they were planning to leave long before they claimed to have been pushed out. When those findings were presented to William, his reaction was eerily calm. Too calm. One aide described it as the quiet before the eruption. He simply nodded and said, "So that's what this was all about." And then, almost to himself, he whispered, "Mother would have seen it coming." That line hit like a punch. Because Diana's legacy had always been their shared bond, the one unbreakable thread tying them together through every royal storm. And now, even that seemed to have snapped. In the days that followed, William withdrew from several scheduled engagements. His team cited personal reasons. Insiders say he spent most of his time in Norfolk with Kate and the children, seeking space to think. Kate reportedly tried to console him, telling him not to act in anger. But he couldn't shake the feeling that his brother had betrayed not just him, but their mother's memory. He had to confront Harry. He knew that. But how do you confront your own blood without tearing everything apart? Because once those words are spoken, once the truth is out, there's no going back. And when that confrontation finally came, it wasn't in front of cameras. It wasn't during a royal summit or a televised statement. It was in a private room, late at night, where two brothers faced off for the first time as enemies instead of allies. But that explosive confrontation, that would come later. Because first, William would uncover one more devastating twist. One that revealed he hadn't just been deceived by Harry. There was someone else involved. Someone on the inside. And that discovery would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The email was only the beginning. What came next would rip through the palace like a silent earthquake, exposing just how deep the deception went. Because soon after that discovery, something else surfaced. Something that would turn suspicion into certainty and anger into full-blown betrayal. It began with a single phrase that kept echoing in William's head: independent partnership strategy. The more he thought about it, the less it sounded like a PR mistake and more like the outline of a blueprint, a carefully constructed plan that had been quietly unfolding for months. But William still couldn't believe it. He needed proof, something tangible, something that couldn't be explained away as a misunderstanding or overreach by staff. And then, that proof landed in his lap, in the form of an email chain that should have been deleted months ago. It was short, only a few lines, but it was the smoking gun. The message referenced a formal agreement draft with an American media company, and attached to it was a confidential memo outlining potential revenue streams for independent media engagements, including documentary projects and interviews focused on personal perspectives and modern royalty. The date? 3 months before Harry even told the Queen about his plans to step back. 3 months. That was all it took for William's world to tilt. The timeline shattered. The narrative, that Harry and Meghan had made their decision spontaneously after feeling trapped, no longer made sense. This wasn't a reaction. It was a roadmap. He read it again and again, trying to process what he was seeing. The attachment included bullet points discussing personal rebranding, narrative ownership, and independent storytelling. Those phrases weren't royal language. They were corporate, Hollywood, strategic. This wasn't a family decision. It was a business move. William's pulse pounded. He could practically hear his mother's voice, the one that had always warned them about manipulation, about how fame can turn family into currency. "They'll use you," she once told them, "and when they can't, they'll destroy you." But now, it wasn't the press using Harry. It was Harry using the press. He pushed the chair back and stood abruptly, his hands shaking. The walls of Kensington Palace, adorned with portraits of kings and queens who'd weathered centuries of scandal, felt suddenly suffocating. He wasn't just angry. He was heartbroken, because it wasn't the institution Harry had betrayed, it was him. And yet, something gnawed at him. How could Harry have pulled this off without anyone noticing? The palace's communication structure was notoriously tight. Every email, every draft, every contact went through multiple approval layers. If Harry had been corresponding directly with U.S. executives, someone inside had to be helping him. That realization hit like a thunderclap. Someone inside the palace was feeding the Sussex operation. Someone with access, someone loyal not to the crown, but to Harry and Meghan. William called an immediate closed-door meeting with his most trusted aide, Simon Case. The conversation, according to insiders, was short and deadly serious. "There's a leak," William said flatly. Case frowned. "You're certain? Find out who it is." What followed was one of the most discreet internal probes in modern royal history. A skeleton crew of aides quietly began tracing communications, reviewing shared files, and cross-referencing email servers. They worked at night, off the books, to avoid alerting anyone connected to the Sussex team. And within weeks, they found what they were looking for. A mid-level staffer had been corresponding with a PR liaison in Los Angeles, forwarding non-public documents and updates. The messages were worded carefully, no explicit confessions, but the pattern was undeniable. Information about upcoming royal engagements, travel plans, even talking points from private meetings had been shared. When confronted, the staffer broke down. "I didn't think it was betrayal," they allegedly said. "I thought I was helping them prepare." Helping. That word twisted like a knife. Because from William's perspective, this wasn't help, it was sabotage. Every leak, every whisper of internal drama had weakened the palace's grip on its own story. And now he understood why. Harry hadn't just planned his exit in secret. He'd built a shadow network within the royal machine itself. The betrayal spread deeper than he'd imagined. Reports later suggested that certain communications had even been scrubbed or erased by sympathetic staffers, making it difficult to determine exactly how long the operation had been running. Some suspected Meghan's team in California had coordinated much of it. Others believed Harry himself had orchestrated it all. But one thing was clear: William was done playing the fool. For years, he had defended Harry's impulsiveness, his temper, his need for independence. But now, faced with undeniable proof that his brother had conspired to deceive the family and used palace resources to do it, the heir decided he would no longer stay silent. He summoned Harry for a private meeting. No aides, no witnesses, just two brothers. The room was heavy with history. The same study where their mother once met with advisors now held the weight of decades of love, loss, and betrayal. When Harry walked in, he looked calm, almost rehearsed. William, on the other hand, looked like a man who'd been holding a storm inside for far too long. "Why didn't you tell me?" William said quietly. Harry didn't answer. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? That the palace wouldn't see what you were doing?" Still silence. William's tone hardened. "You've been planning this for months, behind all our backs. The Queen, Father, me. You lied, Harry." Harry finally met his brother's eyes. "I had to, Will. You wouldn't have understood. Try me." William snapped, slamming his hand against the table. "I defended you. I told everyone you were just lost, that you needed time. And all this time, you were negotiating deals, drafting scripts." Harry's face flushed. "You call it deals, I call it survival. You've never had to survive this circus. You were born to play their game. I wasn't." The words hung in the air like a blade. William's voice dropped. "Then maybe you shouldn't have played me." That line cut deeper than any royal scandal ever could. The argument raged for nearly an hour. Voices raised, accusations hurled, tears shed. By the time it was over, the bond they'd built since childhood had fractured beyond recognition. When Harry left the room, he didn't look back. And William? He sat alone, staring at the empty chair across from him. The chair where his brother once sat beside him, laughing about rugby scores and teasing him about his speeches. Now, it was just silence. For the first time in his life, William realized something terrifying. His brother wasn't coming back. Not emotionally, not politically, not as family. The royal exit wasn't just a decision. It was a declaration of independence from him. That night, a palace aide reportedly found William still in that same room, long after midnight. Papers scattered across the table, a single lamp glowing in the corner. When she asked if he needed anything, he simply said, "No, I just need to think." But he wasn't thinking about press strategy or public fallout. He was thinking about trust, about how quickly it can vanish, and how impossible it is to rebuild. Because now that the truth was out, one question remained. If Harry had built an operation from inside the palace, who else had known? And the answer to that question would be more shocking than anyone, even William, could have imagined. Because the next revelation wouldn't just expose Harry's hidden plans. It would reveal the insider who had helped him all along, a person whose name would leave the royal family reeling. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Inside Buckingham Palace, power moves quietly. Secrets are traded in whispers, not headlines. And when Prince William realized someone from within the royal system had been feeding information to his brother's camp, he didn't call a press conference or issue a royal statement. He called for silence, the kind of silence that only means one thing in royal circles. War had begun. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about control, about protecting an institution that had stood for over 1,000 years. And William, for all his restraint, was done watching it crumble from within. But here's where it gets complicated, because the person helping Harry wasn't just a random aide or a careless staffer. They were someone William knew, trusted, someone who'd been at the family's side for years. And that's what made the betrayal cut even deeper. The investigation began discreetly. William didn't want more leaks, and he didn't want to tip off whoever was responsible. Only 3 people knew what was happening. William himself, his private secretary, and one senior advisor from the communications team who had served under both brothers. They combed through travel records, phone logs, encrypted emails, quietly connecting dots that no one wanted to believe existed. At first, it led nowhere. The palace had dozens of overlapping communication channels, each guarded by layers of confidentiality. But then, one evening, the advisor found something odd, an unregistered phone contact stored in a staff device used during royal tours. The number traced back to a PR liaison working in California, the same liaison who had appeared in the earlier leaked emails tied to Harry's independent branding discussions. That phone contact wasn't in the system by accident. When they cross-referenced it against internal call logs, one name kept appearing, a longtime palace employee who had worked closely with both brothers since their 20s. Someone who'd attended royal weddings, private retreats, even Christmas gatherings at Sandringham. William refused to believe it at first. "Not them," he reportedly said. "They wouldn't do that to me." But denial doesn't erase evidence. And when the communications team retrieved deleted metadata from shared documents, there it was, her name, attached to multiple files sent to an external consultant months before the royal exit announcement. She had been forwarding confidential schedules, briefings, and even early drafts of royal correspondence, all under the guise of helping coordinate external opportunities for the Sussexes. When confronted, she didn't deny it. In fact, her words were so disarming that even William was momentarily speechless. "I thought I was protecting them," she said. "They wanted freedom, and I thought if I could help them prepare, it would be less painful when they left." Less painful? For whom? Because to William, it felt like watching his own home burn down, and realizing the person who lit the match thought they were doing him a favor. He dismissed her quietly, without ceremony or public mention. The palace's HR department cited restructuring, but those who were there said the real reason was an open secret. Her security credentials were revoked that same day. By morning, her desk was empty. And yet, even after the source was removed, the damage was irreversible. Because if one trusted insider had been compromised, how many others were still quietly funneling information? The monarchy's fortress of secrecy, centuries old, had been breached. The queen herself was briefed. The tone of that meeting, insiders say, was one of grim disappointment rather than outrage. "Family must come before fury," she allegedly said. But William couldn't agree. For him, family was the source of the fury. He confided in a close friend that night. It wasn't just a leak. It was treason. Meanwhile, Harry's side of the story was very different. Sources close to him claimed he felt trapped by palace control, that his every move was being monitored. To him, any staffer willing to help them break free wasn't a traitor, they were a lifeline. But in William's eyes, there was no justification. He'd grown up watching how even the smallest leak could destroy reputations, tarnish legacies, and distort truth. Diana's death had taught him that. To him, control wasn't manipulation, it was survival. And now, Harry had weaponized the very system their mother had feared. The palace grew colder in those weeks. Corridors once buzzing with laughter turned quiet. Staff avoided eye contact. Aides whispered in corners. Every document, every email, every phone call was double-checked. The mood was tense, the kind of tension that hangs just before a scandal breaks. William began calling daily strategy meetings, closed-door sessions where phones were banned, and notes were handwritten, not typed. "If we're going to be blindsided again," he told his team, "it won't be because we trusted the wrong people." But deep down, he knew the damage wasn't external anymore. The threat wasn't the press, or the public, or Hollywood. It was his own blood. And that thought haunted him. Because even as the palace scrambled to contain the situation, new stories began emerging in the press. Anonymous sources started hinting at internal divisions, private arguments, and emotional confrontations. Quotes appeared in tabloids that no outsider could possibly know. Someone was still talking. And then, one morning, it happened. A British newspaper ran a front-page story claiming that Prince William privately accused his brother of deceit and betrayal over royal exit planning. The headline used almost the exact phrasing William had used in his private confrontation with Harry, word for word. He froze. How could anyone have known that? The only people in the room during that argument were him and Harry. Unless the room itself wasn't as private as he thought. Palace aides immediately launched a sweep for potential recording devices, fearing that someone might have planted a hidden mic during one of their meetings. It sounds far-fetched, but in the age of constant exposure, nothing seemed impossible anymore. And that's when a rumor began to circulate among staff. A rumor that someone, during one of Harry's last visits to the palace, had secretly recorded a conversation between the brothers, a recording that was now circulating in private media circles, ready to be sold. A secret recording. If true, it would be catastrophic, not just for William's reputation, but for the entire monarchy. Private emotions, unfiltered words, brotherly anger, turned into tabloid spectacle. The stakes had officially shifted from betrayal to blackmail. And as whispers of the recording began to spread, William realized something chilling. This wasn't just a story about Harry leaving the monarchy. It was a story about someone trying to dismantle it. One leak, one headline, one secret at a time. So he made a decision. If the recording existed, he would find it. He would uncover who made it, where it was hidden, and how far the betrayal reached. Because this was no longer about saving his brother. It was about saving the crown. But what William didn't know, what no one inside the palace could have predicted, was that the recording's contents would reach far beyond the feud itself. It would expose private royal secrets that had been buried for decades, truths even the late queen had sworn never to reveal. And when that recording surfaced, it wouldn't just destroy trust between brothers. It would shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. But that revelation, that bombshell secret within the recording, was still waiting to be discovered. And when it finally came to light, no one, not even William, would be prepared for what it contained. The rumor of a secret recording spread through Buckingham Palace like wildfire, quiet, fast, and unstoppable. It started as a whisper among the inner staff. Someone had taped a private conversation between Prince William and Prince Harry during one of their last meetings. No one knew who recorded it, or where, or how, but the very idea that such an intimate moment might exist outside palace walls sent chills through the royal household. For the monarchy, privacy isn't luxury, it's oxygen. Once it's gone, the institution suffocates. And now, someone had stolen its breath. William first heard about the recording not from an aide, not from a journalist, but from someone even closer, a family friend who had received a call from a tabloid intermediary. "They're offering something explosive," the friend warned. "They say it's real, and they want to sell it." William didn't respond at first. He just stood there, frozen, trying to process what he'd just heard. Explosive in royal terms doesn't mean gossip. It means ruin. "What's on it?" he asked quietly. The friend hesitated. "They wouldn't say. Only that it's you. And Harry. Talking about the exit." That was enough. William's pulse quickened. That conversation, the one where he had accused Harry of betrayal, where tempers flared and years of tension spilled out, had been private. No aides, no staff, no cameras. Just two brothers. If that conversation had been recorded, then someone had been in the room. Or worse, someone had bugged it. He immediately called his private secretary. "Lock everything down," he ordered. "Every meeting room. Every office. Sweep it all." Now, by nightfall, Kensington Palace was crawling with security specialists, the kind usually reserved for state intelligence operations. Walls were scanned, furniture was inspected, even the fireplaces were checked for hidden devices. The staff, used to the quiet hum of royal formality, now watched men in dark suits comb through every inch of the building. The results were inconclusive. No active devices. No recording equipment found. Nothing. But that didn't matter. The damage was psychological. Because once the seed of paranoia is planted, trust dies. William barely slept that week. Every message, every phone call, every conversation felt suspect. He stopped using his personal mobile. Meetings were held in cleared rooms, phones sealed in lead-lined boxes. But the fear lingered, because if that recording really existed, it meant someone close to him had access. Someone who had stood in that room during the confrontation. But who? The only people there were him and Harry. Could Harry himself have recorded it? That thought was too painful to accept, and yet impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, whispers reached the tabloids. Anonymous sources began teasing a damning audio file that could expose royal hypocrisy. Some journalists hinted it contained proof that William had lashed out in anger, while others claimed it revealed secret details about the monarchy's inner dealings. The speculation alone was enough to make the palace panic. The monarchy thrives on mystique. It survives because people don't know what happens behind those gilded walls. But if this recording got out, if the world heard William's private fury, his raw humanity, it wouldn't just tarnish his image. It would dismantle the illusion of control that holds the crown together. The Queen was briefed. Her reaction was reportedly quiet, almost eerily calm. "We've survived worse," she said. "But not like this," William replied. "Not from within." Because this wasn't a tabloid scandal born of rumor. This was evidence, captured, preserved, and ready to be sold. And then, just when the situation seemed unbearable, a new twist emerged. A foreign journalist contacted one of the palace's media liaisons with a cryptic message. "I have heard the recording. It's authentic." Those words hit like a thunderbolt. Authentic. That meant someone, somewhere, had already leaked it. The palace immediately went into lockdown mode. Legal teams were mobilized, crisis plans drafted, NDAs reinforced. But none of it mattered. Because in a digital world, you can't control what's already escaped. William's anger turned into obsession. He demanded to hear the audio himself. At first, no one could locate a copy, only fragments described by intermediaries. And then, through a discreet connection, one of his aides obtained a short, grainy clip, just 37 seconds long. It started mid-conversation. Harry's voice. "You've never understood what it's like, Will. You have your destiny. I have a cage." William's reply, firm, pained. "You're not in a cage, Harry. You're running from the very thing that made us who we are." A pause. Then Harry, voice rising. "I'm running from what killed Mom." The clip cut off there. That single sentence, "I'm running from what killed Mom," was enough to ignite chaos. Because it wasn't just emotional. It was symbolic. It painted the monarchy itself as the villain, the very system their mother had fought and suffered under. The press pounced instantly. Headlines erupted. Harry's explosive confession in secret recording. Prince claims monarchy destroyed Diana. William furious over leak that exposes family rift. Within hours, the clip had spread online like wildfire, reposted, remixed, dissected. Some said it was taken out of context. Others claimed it proved that Harry had been right all along. The palace issued no comment. Of course, silence has always been their shield. But silence, this time, sounded like guilt. Behind the scenes, William was livid. But more than that, he was wounded. The conversation had been stripped of its context, weaponized to make him look cold, unfeeling, cruel. The public saw a future king unable to comfort his broken brother. They didn't hear the hours of pleading, the moments of compassion that came before the anger. They didn't know that William had cried that night, alone, for both of them. Kate tried to console him, reminding him that people eventually move on, that the public's sympathy shifts as quickly as the news cycle. But this was different. This wasn't a rumor that would fade in a week. This was a scar that would linger. Because the clip wasn't just emotional. It hinted at something bigger, something darker. Those last words, "I'm running from what killed Mom," had reopened old wounds and old suspicions. The public began questioning again the circumstances of Princess Diana's death, her treatment by the institution, and whether the same forces were now targeting Harry. For William, that was the ultimate betrayal, not just from Harry, but from whoever had made this leak possible. Because the monarchy's darkest tragedy had been turned into entertainment. Still, one question haunted him more than any other. Where was the rest of the recording? Because everyone knew, 37 seconds was just a fragment. The full conversation had lasted nearly an hour. If that much could cause global headlines, what else might it contain? And then, late one evening, William received another message, this time anonymous. Just one line. "If you want to know who leaked it, ask who was in the room before you." It made no sense at first. But then, he remembered something strange from that day. The faint hum of static before Harry entered. The subtle click near the fireplace, as if something metallic had shifted. And suddenly, the impossible seemed very possible. Someone hadn't recorded their conversation from within the room. They'd recorded it from the room next door. But who had access? Only a handful of staff. The kind who were invisible, loyal, trusted. The kind no one ever questioned. William's search narrowed. And when he finally discovered who had set that device, his entire perception of the royal household would change forever. Because the person behind the recording wasn't working for Harry. They were working for someone else entirely. Someone higher. Someone inside the palace walls. And when William found out who, the real war within the royal family would finally begin. The corridors of Buckingham Palace have seen their share of secrets. Scandals whispered into marble walls. Betrayals hidden behind silk curtains. But what Prince William was about to uncover wasn't gossip. It wasn't rumor. It was evidence. Hard, documented, and dangerous. It began when William decided to dig deeper into the palace archives. Not out of curiosity, but necessity. After learning that his father's office had authorized surveillance during his private meeting with Harry, he couldn't shake the question. If they recorded him, what else? Or who else? Had they recorded? So he ordered a private audit. Quiet. Off the books. No trace of it in royal logs. Only two people knew, William himself and a former intelligence consultant he'd worked with during his time with the RAF. The consultant, known only as Mason, was discreet, clinical, and utterly loyal. His instructions were simple. Access the restricted servers that stored the Royal Communications archives. Check for unauthorized recordings. Report directly to William and no one else. At first, Mason found nothing out of the ordinary. Routine audio files, security logs, CCTV clips, the usual protocols. But then, deep inside an encrypted folder labeled Operations Archive, Legacy, he found something that didn't belong. The metadata was wrong. The access codes were outdated. The timestamps stretched back years, long before Harry's exit, long before William had even married Kate. And then Mason noticed something else. Each file bore a curious label: Subject A, 1996, Subject D, 1997, Subject W, 2005, Subject H, 2019. William's heart stopped when he saw the last two. Subject W, Subject H, W and H, William and Harry. The recordings went back decades. Their teenage years, private moments, arguments, conversations with their father, even their sessions with palace-appointed counselors after Diana's death. Every word, every whisper, archived, categorized, and stored under the pretense of security preservation. It hit him like a sledgehammer. They hadn't just been watched as adults. They'd been monitored since they were children. Who authorized this? He demanded. Mason hesitated. According to the file logs, the earliest authorization codes were signed off by the late Duke of Edinburgh. Then, later, by senior security officers. It appears to have been a standard practice for record-keeping. Record-keeping? William's voice broke. You're telling me they recorded therapy sessions for record-keeping? Mason didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, William sat in silence, staring at the flickering screen displaying file after file. His own voice as a teenager, his private grief after Diana's death, his first phone call to his grandmother after the funeral. All of it, preserved like museum artifacts. He clicked open one file, labeled simply, Subject W, Balmoral, 1997. It was a recording he didn't even remember. He was 15 years old, sitting in the study with his father days after his mother's passing. The audio crackled with static. Then Charles's voice. You must be strong for your brother. Don't let the emotions consume you. They will use that against you one day. Then his own voice, small, trembling, breaking. But they already have. The recording ended abruptly. William closed the file, hands shaking. He wasn't just angry now. He was hollow. All those years he'd spent defending the institution, upholding the image, preserving the myth of duty, and the entire time, the institution had been documenting his life like a lab experiment. Kate found him hours later, still sitting in front of the screen, pale and motionless. Will, she said softly, what is it? He turned the monitor toward her. They've been watching us. All of us. For years. She read the file names, her expression tightening. How much of this do they have? Everything, he whispered. Every call. Every word. Even after she died. It took a moment for the weight of it to sink in. The monarchy had recorded not just its public history, but its private wounds, all under the guise of preserving the legacy. But that legacy was poisoned. William instructed Mason to keep digging. Find out how far it goes, he said, and find out if Harry knows. The next morning, Mason returned with more shocking news. It's not just you and your brother, he said. There are additional archives, members of staff, advisors, even the late Queen herself. Hundreds of hours of recorded conversations. And some files have been copied, recently. Copied? Yes. Accessed externally through an encrypted port 2 months ago. Someone's already been here. William froze. Who? Mason took a deep breath. Whoever it was, they had a direct clearance key from the king's office. The realization hit like a blade. The recordings hadn't been discovered by accident. Someone had been using them. Pulling audio from the archives, leaking fragments, manipulating narratives. It wasn't chaos. It was control. And the deeper Mason went, the worse it became. Among the archived materials, he found classified transcripts labeled Incident, 1997, France. Inside were summaries of private communications between royal staff and intelligence officials immediately following Diana's death. Many had been redacted, but a few lines remained intact. Containment protocol initiated. Public narrative established. Unauthorized correspondence intercepted. Female subject deceased. William read those words over and over. Containment protocol. Public narrative. Unauthorized correspondence. It was like watching the ground collapse beneath his feet. For decades, conspiracy theories had swirled around his mother's death. He'd spent his life dismissing them as sensationalism, clinging to the official story because believing otherwise would destroy him. But now, staring at these documents, he felt something shift. There were details here the public had never known. Mentions of calls between Diana and Palace aides the night before her fatal crash. References to letters she had written expressing fear of being silenced. None of it proved anything, but it changed everything. His heart pounded. "Mason," he said quietly, "if this ever gets out, it won't just destroy the monarchy. It will destroy my family." Mason nodded grimly. "Then the question, sir, is not whether it gets out, but who decides when it does." For the first time in his life, William felt the full weight of his inheritance, not as privilege, but as a trap. He wasn't the future of the monarchy. He was its insurance policy, its keeper, its prisoner. And somewhere out there, someone already had the keys. That night, he sent a single encrypted message to Harry. No greetings, no accusations, just one line. "You were right. About everything." Then he sat back, staring out at the dark London skyline, the lights of the city reflecting off the palace windows. He had always believed duty meant silence, that to protect the crown was to protect his mother's memory. But now he knew the truth. The same system that claimed to honor her had buried her, and buried them all with her. And if those recordings ever surfaced in full, the world would finally see the monarchy not as a symbol of unity, but as an empire built on secrets. But William wasn't going to wait for that to happen. Not this time. Because for the first time in royal history, the heir to the throne was preparing to do the unthinkable. He was going to expose the truth himself. And when he did, the monarchy would never be the same again. In the early hours of the morning, long before dawn touched the London skyline, Prince William sat alone in the study at Kensington Palace, a room that had once been a sanctuary and now felt like a cage. On his desk lay a collection of documents, recordings, and encrypted drives, each one a silent indictment of the monarchy he was destined to lead. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking like a prince. He was thinking like a man preparing for war. He had a decision to make, one that would either save the crown or burn it down. William had spent days replaying everything he'd uncovered, the secret recordings, the palace surveillance, the redacted files hinting at his mother's fear before her death. The institution he had defended since boyhood now stood exposed for what it truly was, a machine built not on tradition, but on control. But he couldn't go public, not yet. Not without proof the world would believe. And that's where the next phase of his plan began. He turned to Kate. She had been quiet since he told her everything. The kind of silence that isn't confusion, but calculation. When she finally spoke, her words were deliberate. "If you expose this wrong way, they'll call it treason," she said. "But if you expose it right, they'll call it justice." That became his mantra. Justice, not rebellion. So William began to build a plan. Precise, surgical, impossible to trace. The goal was simple: gather undeniable evidence of internal corruption and use it as leverage to force the monarchy's reform from within. He wouldn't destroy the crown. He'd rebuild it by dragging its shadows into the light. He started by reaching out to allies, not politicians, not journalists, but insiders. Former aides who had left the palace quietly, often after disagreements. These were people who knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively and otherwise. People who had seen too much and said too little. One by one, they agreed to meet him in secret. Coffee shops, private homes, anonymous emails from untraceable accounts. Each meeting added another piece to the puzzle. Patterns emerged, repeated instructions to manipulate press narratives, control emotional messaging, suppress damaging footage, and rewrite timelines. The monarchy, it turned out, wasn't reactive. It was proactive, scripting its own mythology in real time. William kept meticulous records of everything. Dates, names, documents, voice clips. It was dangerous, but he no longer cared. "If they've been recording me all these years," he told Kate one night, "then it's only fair I return the favor." But he wasn't prepared for what came next. Because one evening, a former staffer named Amelia, who had once worked for the late Queen, reached out to him privately. "You're not the first to look into this," she said, her voice shaking. "Your mother did too." That stopped him cold. "What do you mean?" Amelia hesitated. Diana suspected the same thing, that she was being monitored. She kept letters, notes. She tried to track who was controlling the leaks about her. The letters were confiscated after her death. But I made copies. Copies. The word hit like a thunderclap. She agreed to meet him at a private flat in Notting Hill. When he arrived, Amelia handed him a worn leather folder, its edges frayed, its contents yellowed with age. Inside were handwritten notes in his mother's distinct, looping script.